Yeah, did I ever tell you how I actually learned Clojure and why?
No, let's hear that. I would love to hear this story.
Yeah, I was out of spite.
To start the interview, we start in the same place always, and it's just tell me about your first memory with technology. Where did you begin?
Our first computer was a Mac 2 or something like that.
Okay.
And I think the earliest memory of that was playing some Star Wars game.
Okay.
Interestingly, we had, like my dad had a friend that worked for Apple. And then he stopped when they went bankrupt right after Steve Jobs left or something.
Yeah.
It's been a while. And then we went kind of back to, I think, Windows 95 might have been my first real OS.
Okay.
And anything else I went. And I was disappointed because it was so much worse than the Mac from back then.
Was the Mac 2 at the time, was that a color machine? Can you describe the...
God, I don't remember. It was one of those integrated machines like an iMac nowadays.
Yeah.
Might not have been a Mac 2. Might be messing this up. But I think I was running Mac OS 7.
Okay.
One of those machines.
Okay. So you had that, you went to a Windows 95 machine, and approximately how old were you around this time?
Must have been maybe 11.
Maybe 11. Okay. And this, were you in Germany?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so did they have what kind of computer education program did you have in school, or did you have one?
Yeah, let me think about that. So I had been actively interested in computers ever since I've been around 12.
Right.
Which is about when I started getting my first own computer. And then I went to middle school and high school. And I don't believe there was much of a computer education at that point. I still had to try to convince my teacher to let me write essays on the computer as opposed to writing by hand.
Yeah.
They didn't quite trust that. And my handwriting has always been terrible.
Right.
But then for the upper high school, which is a thing in Germany, classes 11 to 13, I actually switched schools to one that had a dedicated computer track.
Okay.
And there I had something like 7 hours or so of computer classes a week. It's very substantial.
So that's a big thing. And what was the nature of those classes? Were they programming? Were they using word processors? What sorts of things?
It was Java.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well,
so it was real programming.
It was real programming.
Yeah.
I actually remember I took an elective at the old school for computers, where we used Visual Basic mostly. And the teacher hated me. I had the worst grade of everybody in the whole class.
Yeah.
Because he said I was just goofing around the whole time.
Yeah. Well, so what kind of student were you generally? You're so likable today. Were you a clown? Were you?
No. I've always been an okay student.
Yeah.
But never particularly good or particularly bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Posted through.
Okay. And I assume university was in Germany as well?
Yep.
And you moved from this 11 to 13, where you were doing some Java, into university.
Not quite.
Not quite. Tell me about the story there then. How did that unfold?
Well, back then, it has changed since, but back then we still had to either join the military for 9 months or do some sort of social service. So I worked in a children's daycare center.
Okay.
For 9 months, which was nice.
Yeah. Was there any computing there, or was that just
no, just little kids?
Yeah.
I was basically a groundskeeper half of the day, and then playing with the kids the other half.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a I found it very enjoyable. And it was a nice break after 13 years of school. Right?
Yeah.
They abolished it since. They don't do it anymore. But I thought it was good.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to study computer science.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't quite believe in computers. They thought it was a fad. I should study something.
Yeah. A passing fad. Nowhere, nowhere. What are you going to do? Play Star Wars for a living?
Pretty much.
Jokes on them. Now you actually can, and you make millions doing it on Twitch. So it's like even that crazy, even that crazy scenario is actually just the real world that we live in now. So, so you wanted to go to university for computer science. Your parents were against it.
My parents are never, or usually not against something strongly, right?
Okay.
I generally trust them.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is that they're never like, you cannot do this, right? Yeah. They'll give me their arguments. For why they think that. And because I mostly trust them, I went with their recommendation and I studied management.
Okay.
That said, it was management with a special focus on business information systems.
Right.
On some teeny tiny university in Germany. So I had a little bit of it, right? But mostly management. Mostly
management training. So at what point then do you start learning about outside of just the computer? So you've got Java, you've got some management training. Let's talk about sort of, are there any lessons that you picked up in your management training that you use in your computing career regularly? Are there highlights there that a programmer like myself or like anybody who would watch this should say, oh, I should take that information away with me?
Very little.
Yeah.
They did teach me English.
Okay.
Which, is kind of helpful nowadays.
Yeah.
They did make me give presentations basically every week of the 3 years that I went, which ended up much more useful than I thought, right, in the computing career. And they introduced me to my wife there, who was an exchange student. So that worked out. Yeah. So there was,
that's pretty sweet, actually. I like that. So how then, and so I assume there's a little bit of computing, not a lot. And so we move up to graduation. How then does computing start for you professionally?
Not for a while.
Okay.
After graduation, I moved to China.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, my wife is Chinese.
Okay.
And because we'd met there and she went back, I was like, oh, I guess I'm moving to China now, right?
Yeah.
And then after she had graduated, she was like, well, I want to do a master's degree. And I said, yeah, sure, fine. And she said, well, but I don't want to stay in Asia, though. And I said, well, I'm not going back to Europe. I just came from there.
Yeah.
And so they mostly kind of spun the globe. And we're like, I heard Canada's nice. So we moved here.
Oh, I love it.
Neither of us had ever been here. And then she started studying finance here at the U of T. And I was looking for a job. And I found a job as a banking consultant.
Okay.
Which, it kind of made sense.
Because you had the finance degree.
I had a management degree.
Management degree, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it seemed like it went in the right direction. It was configuring software systems for specific loans.
Okay.
So not on the technical side, it was the business side. But it seemed to have a little bit of computer stuff. And so I stuck with it for 3 years.
Okay.
And that was terrible. It turns out I hate the banking industry and I hate being a consultant.
Yeah.
And I had the worst time for 3 whole years, but it was hard, right? Because I was an immigrant.
Yeah.
And I was on a closed work permit, meaning I was only allowed to work for that one company. Right?
Okay.
And after 3 years, my wife finally graduated and got a provincial nominee work permit. Okay. And I could piggyback onto that.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, so since I hate what I'm doing day to day and I'm spending my evenings and my weekends programming for fun, and
Okay.
I hear people actually pay for that sort of thing, maybe I should switch careers.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so tell me then about this evening and weekend programming. What kinds of things were you doing?
It's ever since I've been 12, it's been a hobby.
Okay.
Um, anything really. At that point, I was writing iOS apps,
Okay.
mostly just for fun.
Do you remember any of the apps themselves or the functionalities you worked with?
Yeah, of course. One that I really liked was, I called it My Own Way. That was because as a consultant, they would always send me to different places, right? And I always wanted to go somewhere in those cities just to see the city. And so I'd use Google Maps or whatever, right? And it would always show me the most efficient way to get to places, which usually was along some highways.
Yeah.
And it was terrible, right? It's like I'm walking through the city. I'm in Mexico City, and I want to walk along a highway, right?
Yeah.
And so I wrote that thing where you added a point of interest or an address or something, and just showed you a compass that just that it's generally in that direction to find your own way.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I was the only user ever, but I liked it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you made it yourself and it solved the one problem that you had.
I've been always the main user of my programs.
Yeah.
The other one I made, let me just tell you about that because I thought it was how there's EXIF information in photos on where exactly it was taken, mostly GPS coordinates.
Yeah.
And I always thought it's sad that whenever you print that photo out, you lose that sort of info, right? I mean, you can guess, you're like, well, this is in Toronto somewhere, but you don't really know. So I made this little app that added that sort of information as a little QR code onto the picture itself. So you could print it out, you could scan it, and it would show you exactly the coordinates.
That's really cool. So those are a couple of fun ones. And you're developing your program skills very much self-taught outside of that early high school exposure, but mostly you're just learning by doing. You're 3 years into Canada. Your wife finally gets you the freedom permit where you can start looking. Where do you look and where do you land? Or what is the search like?
Awful, completely awful. Because I was an immigrant, right?
Yeah.
I had a work permit at that point, but I didn't go to school for that sort of thing, right? I did not have work experience, right? I was much older than any of my peers that was looking with the same experience. And I'm completely awful at any sort of whiteboarding interviews. Right? They would ask me to do something. I just stand there freezing, sweating. That was terrible. Couple really depressing months. Yeah. And then I finally went to Click where we met, right?
Right. And okay. So that was your first professional programming job. Okay.
And I only got it because they sat you in front of a computer and said, do the thing, right? Like here's a compiler and a problem, make it work.
Yeah. Okay. And so what were the types of things that how long were you at Click again?
6 years.
6 years. Okay. So there's a lot. So let's try and break that down into some phases in terms of the phases of the general timber of the work and what you're learning at the time, and then how you move through those, because there are promotions that happen along the way and you start focusing on other things. I remember there was a time you got really into functional programming with Clojure and Lisp. And so let's really break into each of those things. And so start at the beginning of the Click time and tell me about the type of work that you're doing and the things that you're learning that you might not have gotten on your own.
Okay, so I started as a junior backend developer.
Okay.
And then they threw me into, was it
Mr. Black?
One project that everybody hated.
well, we probably shouldn't name the company, but
it was the project, not the company.
Yeah.
And it's a long time ago. I think it's okay. Anyways, I somehow, even though I started as a backend developer and about this whole big book about C#, I never really got into writing any of the backend code there.
Okay.
And fairly quickly started working on mobile apps, right? That was the thing that got me hired in the end. Because Click was trying to have, you know, some small mobile applications here and there, and I was the only person that had actually shipped something.
Right.
So I started working with mostly Cordova, the cross-platform framework, with little detours into a native iOS development using Objective-C, and developing, you know, small little Android plugins for Cordova.
Yeah.
And I did that for quite a while. Right? It was interesting. It was an interesting field. Mobile was still new. Cross-platform worked pretty well at the time, probably still does. And so I became a senior mobile developer at some point. So people, mostly the idea behind that was that people wouldn't just take me and put me into a backend project.
Right.
I'd be like, well, but I've never done this. Why am I the senior on this project? Right.
Right.
And so I was just working on my little apps. And I think that was around the time when I created the Click Stalker, if you remember that one.
Oh, yes. So you created a mobile app to find out where in the building any individual team member was. And
quite that creepy, right? We had 2 buildings with something like 4 or 5 floors each.
Yeah.
And I just got annoyed at the end of never finding people, right? I would walk to their place and they wouldn't be there. And I'd be like, oh, where are they? And the internal system already showed, oh, that person is on, you know, the
this
second floor. They just went into that door 5 minutes ago. Yeah. And I just wanted to have that all on my phone all the time.
Yeah.
But that got fairly popular at some point with basically every iOS user using it. And I think that's what paved the way for me going into Click Labs at some point.
Right. Okay. So they moved you into the research, effectively the research division, and doing really cool experimental stuff division.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Yeah. So that was the innovation lab, and I just did random stuff, right? I programmed a robot, which was cool. Yeah. And I had to play with VR. That was the newest thing at the point, and Click had all of the expensive toys, right? Yeah. Like the first beta of the Oculus and everything. Some IoT things, which are really nice. And I think I stayed there for about a year. Yeah. And then I moved to the newly formed data science team. Okay. Well, let's talk about your process for working on new and so if you're in a labs situation or an innovation situation, always on the bleeding edge, how do you tackle a problem where you want to build, you have the technology, you have an idea that you want to do something with the technology, you maybe don't even know what. So how do you break this down? How do you start that? The ideas always came from Jan. Right? Okay. Jan was the idea person, and we just had to make it work somehow. Yeah. In terms of the technical process, I guess, I tend to start with a book, just because in a book, all the basics are actually organized, and it's cohesive, right? As opposed to an old blog post here, and then some Stack Overflow thing from last week there, and some meta version, right? And in the book, it's actually written from beginning to end, right? It gives you all of the big concepts, and to lets you put things into context later on. And then you just start trying stuff out. Yeah. Right? Just poke things and see what happens, and try to get the feedback loop to be as short as possible to see if it works or not. Yeah.
And have you ever worked on things where you didn't have a book to go from, or
Sure, but I always try to get one.
you always try to get the book? Okay. And so uh, that's your starting point. Start with the book. And I guess in terms of getting the assignment, that typically gets handed to you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're in that, and then you move on to data science.
Yeah, but not as a data scientist. I was the
Okay.
only implementer of
Okay.
their ideas, right? So they would have horrifically complex, Jupyter notebooks
Yeah.
that they would manually run for whatever reason. And I'd be the person that would say, that sucks. We've done this 5 times now. How about I just take this and make a web app out of it?
Right. Okay. So so Jupyter, explain to me. I have a general sense of Jupyter notebooks, but explain to me what Jupyter notebooks are.
Jupyter notebooks are a way of exploring data, and mostly data, I would say,
Okay.
with the help of programs, right? In which you split up your computation into small cells, small pieces, where you don't have to do the whole computation at once, right? In a program, you have an input and then it does all of these things and then you get an output, right? In Jupyter, you start with some piece of data, and then in your cell, you munch it, right? You do something with it just to see how it reacts. And then you get data of a slightly different shape.
Yeah.
And then you analyze it. You're like, I wonder what you can do with that, right? Maybe plot it, maybe you look over it, you do something with it. And then you do the next step, right?
Yeah.
So you interactively develop a certain flow of what to do with it.
Okay. Okay. And you would take these things that they've done 4 or 5 times and say, all right, we know that you like this flow. Let's convert that into a web app. What was that like? I guess that's a lot of Python.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was there anything else particularly interesting about that, or?
I like data scientists in general. I think they're all very, very smart, very nice people overall. The problem space was very interesting as a whole, right? And I didn't do any data science, but I've always liked being adjacent to that field where
data adjacent.
Work with them. Yeah. And the nice thing was, because I was the only implementer and the only person that maintained it, I had complete freedom, right? I never had to worry about, is this going to be readable for the next person, right? Do I have to apply Python best practices? I could just write it the way that I thought was right.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest upside of this job.
Yeah. And how happy do you feel the person was that inherited your stuff? Was it okay? Or?
I can tell you about that.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I've recently been asked to revisit some of it and write it in proper Python.
Oh, really? Even though you've been gone for years?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Finally broke and they couldn't figure it out.
Okay. Okay. And so somebody phoned you up and said, we really need you? Okay. Okay. Are you good? Are you still thinking about it?
I'm going to do it. I always liked the projects and I liked what they were doing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require a lot of work.
Right. So. Okay. That's pretty fun. That's very nice of you. So what else? Is there anything else we could learn, that somebody could learn from this phase of your experience?
Yeah. The whole process of getting these interesting assignments.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple of people ask me how it happens that I get the neat stuff to work on. Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the day-to-day work can be dull in that field.
Yes. Yeah.
You know. And so I was always, well, I want to say lucky to get these assignments, but the truth is that comes from just putting your stuff out there.
Yeah.
I tend to solve my own problems.
Yeah.
But then I usually don't stop, right? That's about half of the work. And then you put it out there and make it easy for people to use it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I find people notice. Right? Then you don't just write the my own way, you put it on the App Store. That's how you get the job, right?
Right.
You don't just do the click stalker, you promote it, right? You put it
and you
everywhere.
share it and you support it.
You help people.
Yeah.
There were so many support emails, right? But it pays off. It's both gratifying to see that people use what you build.
Yeah.
And it really enables you to progress and to be the one that gets picked for cool things.
Right. That's actually really good advice. And it would be, the story of ClickStalker is very generalizable into something like an open source community contribution. If there was something that you wanted to solve that you could deliver to the internet, and then people start following it, and you sort of, it's effectively brand building as a developer. And you did that in the scope of a medium-sized company. I guess they were between 500 and 1,000 people while you were there. Yeah. And that wound up getting you into what's probably the premier position for a developer at that company. So that's a really great piece of advice, I think, about how to manage your career. And that's sort of, we're saying, take something that you're passionate about or interested in and do it and share it. Which is interesting. When was the Clojure stuff?
Oh, that is still ongoing.
That's still going. Okay, well, we'll talk about Clojure later, because I think there are some questions I have about functional programming, but we can keep going through your career.
It probably started, I want to say, 4 or 5 years ago at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So for the data science, what are we? How long does that last? Was that where you went out, or was there anything else?
No, that's where I went out.
Okay.
After about a year, I think.
Okay.
And there's a happy reason for why I went, and that was that Qlik, being a agency, just never had much need for deep technical expertise. Right? Yes. So I was the happiest I'd ever been at Qlik. Right. Yeah. It was great. And I knew there was nothing that could top it. Right. I'd maxed out the career of a developer at Qlik. And
according to your interest profile, but yeah.
Yes, obviously.
Yeah.
And that, as happy as I was with that, for me meant I had to move somewhere else.
Right. You saw this thing, you realized how much you loved it, and you said, no, this. And what then is the process? So I assume at some point within that year, you made the decision.
No, it was.
Or you got approached.
I find with these things, you never make the specific decision, I will leave now and start looking. You kind of become more open to being approached, right?
Okay.
Or at least that's how it's always been for me, right? And so it wasn't like I went out and applied anywhere, or even told my friends, hey, I'm looking.
Yeah.
It was more like I had decided for myself it was probably time to move on.
And when you made that decision for yourself, you sort of internally said, okay, I'm going to start picking up the phone now, right?
Pretty much.
As a developer, the phone's always ringing with a new recruiter with an offer, and part of how we feel is, well, just don't pick it up and keep going. I'm busy. But as soon as you start picking up the phone, you go, oh, okay, let's talk about what you have. And so let's talk a little bit more about your experience in that. How long did that period last before you had something?
Much shorter than I expected.
Yeah.
I was talking with a friend who had recently joined a startup, and she's like, "Oh, you're open to stuff? We have stuff. Why don't you just come in and talk to our CTO?" I'm like, I guess why not, right? Because you pick up the phone. And that went super well. Like, the guy is completely awesome, and we're still friends, and we completely hit it off. Right. And at that point, I was like, oh, I guess I'm getting, a big pay bump, and it's something I haven't done before. I've never worked for a startup before. This might all just work out. Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall roughly the percentage of the pay bump that you jumped for?
Yeah, 20%.
20%. So that's really good. That's a really good,
significant. Especially since I knew that there was potential for more.
Yeah.
And at Click, right, there was no more development, so no more salary increase.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. And so is this the place you're at now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so they are, I think in terms of recent funding rounds, they are one of Toronto's top 3 startups. So they're a really big deal in town.
And as of 2 days ago, I think we're a unicorn.
Are you?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
$1.2 billion valuation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. So, wow, congratulations. Okay. I didn't know that. I'm really happy for you. And so you come in, are you doing Jupyter notebooks off the bat, or are you doing machine learning or AI?
No, I came in as a senior technical architect.
Okay.
And I kind of promoted myself into that role, right? Because I was like, in the machine learning team, one day I said, I want a promotion. Yeah. And my boss said, well, what do you think you should be? And I said, well, I might be the only one, but I'm the one architecting the applications, so I think I should be a technical architect, right? Yeah. And I was like, oh, I guess, right? And so I went as an architect, and they kind of believed me. And so that's what I've been doing more or less ever since. Okay. So I mostly write backend applications in Python, and design the technical solution for any new feature.
And so here's a question. As an architect, do you now pay more attention to the way in which a program grows such that other developers after you will actually be able to work with it?
So as I recently had the chance to look over my old code, I still don't think it's bad. It's just that my convictions of how software should be written conflict with the way that Python is typically written. Right? They align very closely with how Clojure is usually written, which I think is why I like it so much.
I see. Yes.
But it does throw people off.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's bad. It's just different.
Right. Okay. So you are writing your Python in what many would consider to be a functional style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And honestly, every time I read about functional programming and try and wrap my head around it, I find it is such a foreign concept because, in fact, I have this book right here, Clean Architecture, where he talks about the fundamental feature of functional programming is that you can't set variables. Now, there is a case, there's a special case where you can, but for the most part, he says everything's immutable. It doesn't change. And so that strikes me as very, very foreign a way of thinking. And so I think maybe that's a really good time to ask you to explain functional programming as if I was an idiot, because I am. I don't get it. Like, I still don't get it.
There is a new book, which is basically functional programming for idiots, and I have it somewhere here. Okay. So this one is basically functional programming for idiots.
Okay.
And I'll be happy to tell you more about it, but there's a book.
Okay.
Also, since we're talking about it, clean architecture is terrible. Read this one.
Philosophy of software design. Okay, I'll put that one onto the list.
I want to way better. Clean. Any of the clean coder, clean architecture, I found them terrible.
Really? Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll talk about that too after we figure out a little bit more about functional programming.
Yeah, I think the core idea of functional programming is just that your code should only depend on the things that you have right in front of you, and typically that means function arguments, right? Where you don't assume that there's an object instance floating around that has some internal state, right? You get some database there that you can manipulate. And it's just because that way, anything that can change and that your program depends on is right in front of your eyes.
Okay.
It's a way of simplifying these things.
Okay.
Right.
So that sounds, if I was to compare that to a dependency injection, are they similar, or am I on the wrong track?
You're mildly on the wrong track.
Okay.
Because with dependency injection, the things can still change underneath you.
Okay.
Right? If stuff changes that you don't change, and it can just happen because it happens in a different thread, right? Or you give something a reference and it comes back changed in some odd way, you're having a hard time programming functionally.
Okay.
Right? The whole idea is anything that you manipulate in some way is directly in front of you and it doesn't change.
Okay.
Right? And that's how you get to immutable stuff here and to don't do stuff with variables there.
Yeah.
But those are details.
Yeah. And how do you get the stuff that you need in front of you?
By pushing all of the things that can change, database interaction,
yeah,
network IO, whatever you want, to the edges of the application, right? You get all the stuff that you need, and then you get the pure functions that just act on this unchanging data, right?
Okay.
And then you do all of your processing, and then at the end you save it to wherever.
Okay.
That's the general idea of it.
Okay. I'm probably going to need time to process that because I still think I'm struggling with functional programming. But let's talk about you just presented a pretty strong opinion on the clean architecture and clean coder. What are the things that lead you to those conclusions? These are really interesting to me because I'm actively reading clean architecture right now. And I'm getting stuff from it, but I want to see if your strong opinions are matching onto the things that I might consider criticisms of it as well.
These books are products of their times.
Yeah.
And they're counter reactions to the programming culture of that time, right? And as a result, he espouses things like object orientation very, very heavily, right? Because right before that, you had procedural programming, and people would just only do that, right? And compared to that, writing your programs in an object-oriented way is just clearly better in nearly all circumstances, right? But it's not a panacea, right? I don't think it's holding up to what we've learned since then. The same with test-driven development, right? Which the things that he's going on about, how important this is, right? And this is just because prior to that, programmers would not write tests, right? You would write your code and you give it to the QA department.
Yeah.
And sometime next week, they would, write some tests and run it against whatever, right? But it was never, the only reason why he is so strongly for these things is to contrast it with the programming of the time. It doesn't make them good ideas always,
Yeah. So it looks like clean architecture was 2018. So I'm not sure that aligns with
in 2018, or is that actually from 2018? And I might be conflating it with clean code.
Well, yeah, because I have clean code right here. So the clean architecture, the only date that I see on the published page is 2018. And I don't think that one has, well, I haven't finished it, so I can't tell you for sure. This one's first one was 2009. So there you go. Those are the stories. Okay.
I'm fairly sure they're older originally.
Okay.
But I might be making that up.
That's okay. It's not super relevant, but so here we are. You're at your current place. You've got you're doing your architecture, and have you continued doing the architecting of, you're architecting a web app, or?
That's mostly what it is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And what sorts of new skills have you picked up in that time?
Tons.
Yeah.
Most of the architecting applications for many people with many different skill sets is something I hadn't done before. Right?
Yeah.
I architected applications for myself, which is different, right? I will understand my code later on.
Yeah.
The scope and the what's the word? The scale of it all is very different at data, right? It's a different thing to write web apps for a couple of internal people versus, I don't even know how many people or how many users we have. I think our database is growing by 10 gigs a day or so. Okay.
So those are real, those are starting to look like pretty serious, serious issues in the scaling area. So you have a high volume site, or it's high data out of medium volume?
So what we're doing is we're a customer support automation platform.
Yeah.
That means specifically our core product is a chatbot.
Okay.
That our clients, the companies, create themselves. So we give them the toolkit for it, and they create the actual flows in it, right? Yeah. As opposed to other chatbots, we actually do things, right? We're not just talk. You go to TELUS, you can change your phone plan. You go to AirAsia, you can change your seat within that text-driven interface.
Okay.
Because it's not just the automated part, it's also live chat interaction. It branches out into all sorts of other systems, right? And that's the main thing. Where all the data is coming from is just the customer interactions, right? There's a lot of messages just going back and forth.
Okay. So what are the things that you're learning about scaling, or I mean, because that's the first and biggest, that's the first thing you went to when we talked about the new skills you picked up. What are your recommendations or, learnings about scaling and how to scale? How would somebody who was starting from zero and had scale problems to address, what things should they think about?
So the thing that I found most interesting about scaling is that a lot of the recommendations for smaller scale don't apply anymore, right? They're counterproductive, right? Stuff like you're typing your database very strictly to always have a strong data schema just don't apply anymore when you have a couple terabytes of messages and can't just change the schema because you need a new field, right? That's not a thing where you want to normalize your schema and don't keep all the data in one place. That's not a thing you can do, right? Your online transaction data store needs to be different from your analytics data store, right? You have to copy data over or you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have things like deleting data, right? That's one of our biggest issues. Like you get a GDPR personal information deletion request, and you're like, well, what do? You have 15 different data stores of derived data in some way.
Yeah.
How do you make it so that you can delete it? Right? You get some data lake thing on S3. How do you delete that specific conversation?
Yeah.
That's very interesting problems, but it's hard.
Yeah. So are you using SQL or have you moved into a NoSQL? Pardon me. Are you using the one that I've read about recently that Discord uses is Cassandra? Are you using Cassandra?
No, we're using MongoDB.
Okay, Mongo. Okay.
Yeah. And we're hitting the limits.
Okay.
We're having active problems with it.
Okay.
Mongo has been good for us in the beginning, up until 1 to 2 terabytes of data.
Okay.
But they are not well set up to deal with more data than that.
Right. And at 10 gigabytes a day, you're moving outside of there. And so do you have ideas on how you're going to solve for that? Are you thinking of a new platform or?
It's hard, right? We have 100,000 lines of Python just in our main backend API. And Mongo is just an assumption all throughout it.
Right.
So we can't really do it. What I'm doing currently, my current project is moving more into a hot cold storage kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
Where we're only keeping a couple of months of data or conversation data, at least in MongoDB, and we're offloading the rest into S3.
Yeah.
Which should also allow us to shrink the database to something that Mongo can handle and will actually let us start out better. Right?
Yeah.
The other thing I'm looking at is Amazon's Documentdb, which interestingly has a apparently completely compatible MongoDB interface.
Yes. Yeah, that's my understanding too, is that the interface that they use is the same across Documentdb and Mongo. And there's Documentdb, Mongo, and something else. I wish I could remember it, but there are two different Amazon services that come up as the Mongo stand-in.
DynamoDB, most likely.
DynamoDB, correct. That's the one. So that's those two. And so your expectation is that Documentdb will hopefully scale beyond your 2 terabyte limit.
Yeah. We're currently at 4 terabytes of compressed storage.
Yeah.
And it's hurting us, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. Like everything, it has trade-offs, right? Where Documentdb, for instance, supports up to 64 terabytes easily, but it doesn't shard out into different regions, which you can do with MongoDB.
Yeah.
Right? So we just have to see.
Yeah. I mean, I guess anyways, so What are the things that you are hoping to, or what are the, so you're working on this one project. Do you have a longer term plan for professional development, or do you work just on the thing that's in front of you and hope that you hope that you're still enjoying yourself? Like, do you structure your professional development, or tell us about that? You have a lot of books, clearly.
I have a lot of books. I don't structure it in any way. Right?
Yeah.
And I told you a little bit about my life and how there's been substantive upheaval every couple of years in a way that I could not have foreseen. And it's always been like that, right? So I don't, like, no 5-year period has ever been how I ever expected it to be.
Right.
So I don't see the need to plan.
Yeah. Okay. And are you, in addition to this stuff that you're working on in your day job, are you still doing nighttime programming on your own problems?
Sometimes.
And
how exhausted I am right now.
Yeah.
The current projects are going.
Yeah. And so currently you're not actually trying to solve anything or learn anything outside of the work that you're on.
Most of the time when I'm learning something new, it's at least tangentially related to my work problems. Right?
Okay.
So what I'm currently reading up on the most is event streaming systems.
Okay.
Because in my mind, that's where we should go, right? We are having streams of messages going back and forth between our customers, right? Our chatters, and either our automated system or some live support people. So in my mind, that is a stream processor.
Right.
So that's what I'm reading up on.
Okay. And what are you learning about event streaming processors? And so is that what are the names of the main big players in this space?
Kafka is definitely the biggest one.
Yeah.
Kinesis is Amazon's kind of competitor to it. That's what the main event store, right? And then you got stuff like Spark on the edges, Flink for actual processing.
Yeah. And what are you learning about Kafka? And so what are you learning about Kafka then? I assume that's the one that you're going with.
Everything, right?
Yeah.
So I do it. I find it interesting that the paradigm is actually very close to functional programming, right? In that you would try to depend on the events, right? And the events go into your stream processor, and that is basically it. That is what you're working with, right?
Yeah.
You might join some other streams onto it or get some stuff from an external data store. But overall, it is events in and events out.
Yeah. Okay. And you have something on your application that is it you write a webhook or a webhook equivalent type thing. So a message comes into Kafka, it is tagged with a certain type of event, and that bubbles through into a webhook on your app, or
kind of, sort of. The way that our app is currently structured is that we're accepting messages through a REST endpoint, right? Just post JSON against something. It goes onto a queue, some task worker picks it off, does its thing, right? And then sends it out over WebSocket where it goes back to the chatter. Right?
Okay.
So there is already an implicit event streaming going on, except it's very implicit, right? It's wrapped up in our queue semantics and the way that workers do something and the way that we push something out of our WebSockets. Moving that into a proper event streaming system would just make that clearer, right? And more explicit.
Right. Okay.
We don't need any webhooks there, right? There's a stream of events and there's a processor on top that sense stuff out again.
Yeah.
This whole process.
Okay. Okay. And is there anything that's really exciting you in programming, or or anything you see coming in the future that you think is really interesting?
I am still most excited about Clojure, I would say.
Yeah.
Where that whole ecosystem is going, and that hopefully those ideas are getting more traction, because they really deserve it, right?
Yeah.
Just cutting out so much bullshit out of programming.
Okay.
I find a lot of programming nowadays is just red tape, right? You get boilerplate over there, and you make the compiler happy with all of the types that you typed yourself to death with, right? And then you get a billion unit tests just, using up electricity, because a lot of them are so mocked out that they don't actually test anything at all.
Okay.
And then it goes into your 10,000 line YAML container setup, and I just find it tiring.
Yeah.
Right. With Clojure, you get data and some functions that act on the data, and then you're done.
Yeah. Okay. And we already know where somebody would start by looking at Clojure based on your recommended. You'd start in a book, right? That's you get a book and you go for it. And yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know that I don't know that I have much else to ask. I think we've gone through everything that's going on and everything that's. Is there anything that you particularly wanted to talk about?
Yeah, did I ever tell you how I actually learned Clojure and why?
No, let's hear that. I would love to hear this story.
Yeah, I was out of spite.
Okay, so tell me the story of that.
In programming languages overall, you kind of squint and you know what's happening, right? Whether that's PHP or Python.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Anything, you're like, I know what's happening there, right? I might not write it, and I might not, they call it an array and I call it a list, but overall it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I was browsing the internets, as one does, and I came across two languages where that was absolutely not the case. And those were Clojure and Haskell.
Yeah.
And I just got angry, right? I want to know stuff, right? I'm like, I thought I was a fairly competent programmer, and I looked at it and I had no idea what was happening. And so I randomly picked Clojure out of the two, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn you, right? I'm going
to teach you a damned lesson for being so hard to understand.
Exactly.
And you're going to tame it into submission. Yeah. And now it's just the thing that you love, and every one of and the style of programming has permeated everything else that you do, it would sound like.
Yeah, very much. And I find the more senior I become, the more the things that Clojure does fit with my experience.
Right.
Like all of the decisions, even the ones that I were iffy about in the beginning, I'm like, okay, now I see. Like now that my database is burned down, I can see why he's doing it this way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you said that was about 4 years ago that you came across it, you got angry at it, and you taught it a lesson, or it taught you. That's a really great story. I like that. That's really fun. Are there any others? How is life in general? We're in Toronto, we're under lockdown still, but you have your wife with you. Yeah. How is life?
Good. We're expecting a baby in about 2 months.
I'm so happy for you on that.
Thank you.
I've got the photos of my guy on the wall here, and he is, and I have a line of toys right there behind me to make sure that everybody knows that this little guy is always in my life. And I'm so excited for you to get to experience that same thing.
Thank you.
It's just such a joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, our families are all outside of Canada, which is making it a little hard, right? We haven't seen
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
families in 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're all, do you have your first shot yet? Are you?
Yeah, yeah. Ever since they moved pregnancy up into the highest risk group.
Yeah. Good. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me about your new job. I'm excited.
My new job
Yeah,
is,
whatever.
I'm really excited about this. So, the company is called Zensurance. They do an app that helps commercial businesses find commercial small business typically find commercial insurance, which is traditionally a very long process that takes up to months to do. And because of their automated systems and their really fancy database stuff, they can do this 2-month job in real time. And you punch in your situation, and for simple jobs you can get your insurance on your credit card by the end of a web form transaction. So that's a really good service for customers. I think that's a real difference versus what the old world used to be in terms of that. So they've got a pretty good service, a pretty good niche there. My their tech stack, which is really interesting to me, is going to be TypeScript and MongoDB, two that I'm interested in learning. And there's one more that I've been reading about recently called GraphQL. And I think that GraphQL is going to be the biggest thing to happen to, I think it's the most revolutionary change in APIs since REST came out in 2000. So I think this is, I mean, it came out in 2015. So, but I think it's ready for prime time now with the open sourcing of it and the GraphQL Foundation and everything. But I think it is the most exciting thing to happen to APIs in about 20 years. And you might be saying, why? Why is GraphQL so exciting? Well, if you have a typical mobile device and it works with a REST API, the way that a REST API works is it sends out its first request to authenticate you with the app, and then it comes back and says you're authenticated. Then you send out your next request to get a user object, and it comes back and you've got your user object. Then you send out 5 more requests for this list of data and this list of data and this list of, and so all of this stuff, and each of the objects that comes back is the full fat object, unless you're writing individual endpoints for tiny request, but even still, through all of that, you are using network payload, you're using you're using bandwidth. All of this stuff is going on. But what GraphQL does is it changes the format. You get a single endpoint to make your requests from in GraphQL. You get a structured, effectively like a JSON looking object, but it's a JSON like query language where you say request these 3 fields from this object, request these 2 fields from this object, and so on and so forth. And it just sort of, the shape of your request matches exactly to the shape of the fields that come back to you. And you can get any object in your entire API through this one statement. And so what you effectively do is you get the tiniest possible payload coming back to your app to fulfill your needs. You get it all in a single request. All of the heavy lifting of grabbing that information is done by the server as opposed to the user's app. And so in terms of this separation of front end and back end, by offloading to the powerful servers, it means the phones, their batteries are going to last longer, and their network bandwidth is going to be much, much smaller. And so I think versus REST and versus, so I mean, SOAP is already gone, and WCF is already gone to the annals of legacy code. But I think in terms of comparing GraphQL to what you're getting out of REST, I'm just so excited by the idea of working on that, that's what I'm planning on really diving into and trying to bring to the new location. They're open to talking about it. Certainly we're on REST. They're on REST right now. We're on REST. But I think it really sounds revolutionary in terms of, I think it will do good things for the end user and the programmer, the front end programmer, who has a single endpoint now and gets just the data that they want. So I think in terms of working, and here's another thing that's exciting about GraphQL is in terms of versioning your API. If you have any individual type in there, right? So you've got your user type and it has a first name and a last name and an email and a doopy, right? And you say, I want to add one more field to this user for an individual request that you can add that and it won't break any of the old API calls, because all of the old API calls, they just don't have that field listed. So that data doesn't come back into them and they don't care that the underlying API has changed. It certainly is not, just like everything, it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem, but it really knocks out a bunch of huge problems for devices, I think. And it takes care of versioning in a pretty good way, not perfect. There are certainly problems with it, but like, I'm so excited about GraphQL. I'm pretty excited about TypeScript. I think it's close to C#. I love C#, but like TypeScript is kind of, oh, and it's React. So I'm very excited about React as well. So it's sort of got 4 super exciting new technologies that I'm really excited to work in. And like I mentioned off the top, there's also this content creation piece where 20% of my time, one day a week, is spent just doing podcast activities. So it's like, I've been doing these things. I've been doing these at night. This is, we're 8 p.m. right now. And I've been and after an interview, I'll open up my editor and I'll be working until 2 a.m. just going through and, putting in titles and trimming out, bleeping out names like BGen or something, like, so, to have that folded into my actual responsibilities and to get the chance, to interview some of their developers, to raise the profile of the rest of the team. I think all of these things are just so exciting to me. The pay bump is, not going to hurt. It's going to help cover daycare and house repairs and mortgage costs. And so those things are all just, and the change, because I've been where I've been for 10 years and it's so similar from day to day that you just run up against the wall in terms of learning new things. So I haven't been excited like this in a long, long time. And I'm just so excited. I can't wait to start. I'm so excited.
When do you start?
The 31st. So the end of the month. I've got 2 weeks or 9 days or something. I've been checking them off as they go by. I can start tomorrow. I can start tomorrow. And so that's really good. Yeah.
I'm very glad for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you have reports?
No.
No. Okay. So you don't have any responsibilities around training other developers or managing their time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So depending on the project, I'll be team lead or something, right? And I'll do task management, that sort of thing. But
yeah.
Not generally.
Okay. Okay. So you don't have any tips that people could pick up in terms of how do you train, how do you share your knowledge across the team? Or
no, probably not.
no? Okay. Well, that was interesting. Anyways, I think this has been really fun. I've really enjoyed this. And it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you and to connect with with old friends.
Yeah. Once it's allowed to go outside, we should meet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of that to be doing as soon as we can go outside and yeah. Anyways, I think we're at a good spot to wrap it up, and I'd like to thank you so much for your time and telling me your story.
Absolutely.
All
That was
right.
fun.
Yeah. See you later. Bye.